Christmas is supposed to be a day of love, family, and calm moments. But in my house, something happened that no one expected. The lights were shining, the food was ready, and everyone was waiting to sit at the table. I walked toward my usual seat, smiling and ready to join my family. But then my son-in-law turned around, pointed at me, and shouted words I never thought I would hear inside my own home. Everyone froze. My grandson looked scared, and in that moment, I knew Christmas would never be the same again. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe. The house smelled of roasted chicken, warm bread, and cinnamon candles. I had been in the kitchen since morning, making sure everything felt like Christmas. My daughter, Tanya, had told me that her husband, Kelvin, wanted this year to be special. I didn't argue. I simply stepped aside and let them plan whatever they wanted. It was still my home, but I didn't want any trouble. When the guests began to arrive, laughter filled the living room. People moved around the dining area, admiring the decorations. The table looked beautiful: golden plates, red napkins, bright lights, and bowls of food lined up like a feast in a picture. Kelvin stood at the center of it all, talking proudly about how he set everything up. I noticed how he kept pointing at things, explaining every tiny detail as if he had built the house himself. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and walked toward the dining room. My grandson, Leo, saw me first. He smiled shyly and waved. I smiled back, but when I stepped closer to the long table, Kelvin suddenly stopped talking. His eyes narrowed at me, and his jaw tightened. "What are you doing here?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I froze for a moment, confused. "I'm just taking my seat," I said quietly. Kelvin stepped toward me with a look I knew too well. "No, you're not invited to this dinner. Go away." His voice rose even higher. I said, "Go away. You're not part of this. This is my table." A few guests gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Someone dropped a spoon. Tanya stood near the kitchen door, staring at the floor as if she wished she could disappear. Her hands trembled. She didn't say a word. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the kind of pain that only disrespect can cause. This was my home. I had opened my doors. I had cooked half the food. I had raised Tanya in this same house. And yet here I was, being told no, shouted at like a stranger who had wandered in without permission. Leo looked scared, holding his little cup with both hands. His eyes begged me not to cry, but I didn't cry. I stood still, letting the noise settle around me. The guests stared, waiting to see what I would do. Kelvin crossed his arms, proud of himself, sure that I would simply walk away quietly and hide somewhere. But I didn't walk away in shame. I lifted my chin, turned around calmly, and walked toward the front door. My steps were slow and steady. The whole room fell silent as they watched me go. I wasn't leaving to cry. I wasn't leaving to hide. I was leaving because I had something important to do. Before that Christmas day, life inside my home had slowly changed in ways that I didn't expect. It began with small things, things so tiny that most people would laugh if I mentioned them. But small things grow when someone believes they are more important than everyone else. When Tanya married Kelvin, I tried to welcome him with an open heart. I cooked for them, helped them settle, and even allowed them to stay in my house when their first apartment became too expensive. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't set rules. I only wanted peace for my daughter and comfort for my grandson. At first, Kelvin pretended to be grateful. He thanked me for letting them stay and acted polite whenever guests were around. But when the front door closed and the house became quiet, his behavior changed. He started walking around the house like he was checking what belonged to him. It began with small comments, "This furniture is old," or "Why is this picture still here?" I ignored these things because I didn't want trouble. Then one day, while I was out buying groceries, I came home and found that the living room had been rearranged. My favorite chair was pushed into a corner. The pictures of my late husband had been removed from the table and kept on a shelf. Kelvin sat on the sofa with his legs crossed, acting as if nothing strange had happened. "Why did you move my things?" I asked. "I'm making the place look better," he replied without looking up. "This house needs a new touch." I didn't argue. I simply put the pictures back where they belonged. But that evening, When I went to bed, I realized the pictures were missing again. Kelvin had taken them and locked them in a box in the guest bedroom. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said, "You're too attached to old things. Move on." Tanya begged me not to react. "Just give him time," she said softly. "He doesn't mean harm." I didn't blame her. She loved him and didn't want to see the cracks in their marriage. So I stayed quiet. I thought things might get better, but they didn't. Kelvin started walking into my bedroom without knocking, complaining about how I arranged my clothes. He unplugged my TV one afternoon, saying the noise bothered him even though I had worn headphones. He even told Leo not to play in the hallway because he owned that space now. More and more, he acted like the house was his, and I was the one who needed permission to use it. I noticed how his voice became louder every week, how he spoke to me with less respect, and how Tanya avoided looking at me whenever it happened. The worst part was not the words, but the silence inside the house. The silence that came after he shouted. The silence where Tanya would hide in the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes so she didn't have to choose between us. The silence where Leo would tug on my clothes and whisper, "Grandma, are you okay?" I stayed calm because I didn't want to tear my daughter's marriage apart. I wanted Leo to grow up in a peaceful home. But deep down, I knew this peace was not real. It was the kind of peace that comes from keeping your mouth shut, even when you're hurting. Months passed, and Kelvin grew bolder. He started hosting gatherings without asking me. He invited his friends and acted like the master of the house. He told them things like, "I'm trying to fix this place," or, "You know, when I finish renovating, it will look good." I listened quietly, but I never forgot that every wall, every chair, every corner of that house was mine. So when Christmas came and Kelvin said he wanted to handle everything, I agreed. I stepped back. I kept calm. I didn't want to start a fight, but I also knew something he didn't know, something he had never bothered to ask about, something he assumed he controlled. My house, my rules, my decisions. He didn't expect that one day he would go too far. He didn't expect that his loudest moment would wake up my quiet strength. Long before the Christmas gathering, I had already started paying close attention to the changes happening inside my home. I wasn't loud about it. I didn't confront Kelvin or warn him. I simply watched and learned. Every time he moved something without asking, every time he spoke as if he owned the place, every time he embarrassed me in front of others, I added it to a quiet list in my mind. One afternoon, months before Christmas, I received a call from an old friend who worked as a lawyer. He asked how I was doing, and without meaning to, I told him a little about what had been happening. I didn't mention everything, but I said enough for him to understand that I was uncomfortable in my own home. He asked me to visit his office the next day. I went, mostly because I trusted him. He listened carefully and said something I had not expected. "Protect your home now, not later." He explained things I never knew I needed to think about. He told me that as long as the house was in my name, I had full control. But if I didn't put certain papers in order, someone could cause trouble in the future, especially someone who acted like they owned the place. He didn't mention Kelvin's name. He didn't need to, so I followed his advice. We updated the house documents. We set clear rules for ownership and access. We added protections that would prevent anyone from forcing me out or claiming any part of the property. When he handed me the final set of papers, he said, "Keep these safe. One day you may need them." I didn't know when that one day would come, but I kept the documents in a locked drawer in my room. Nobody knew about them, not even Tanya. I loved my daughter, but she often rushed to calm Kelvin whenever he was angry, and I didn't want her to feel torn between me and her husband. As the year moved on, Kelvin became more controlling. He started making plans without telling anyone. When December arrived, he decided that Christmas dinner should be held in my house, but it would be his event. He wanted everything to look perfect so his friends and relatives would admire him. Tanya tried to balance both sides. "Please don't argue with him," she whispered to me one night. "He just wants things to look nice." I smiled gently. "I'm not arguing. Let him do what he wants." And truly, I didn't stop him. I watched him bring in decorations. I watched him rearrange the dining room. I watched him order things online and make loud phone calls about the grand dinner he was planning. I did not complain. I did not interfere. I simply let the days pass. But inside my heart, I felt a quiet strength grow. Not anger, just a firm awareness of what belonged to me and what I would no longer accept. On the morning of Christmas Eve, while I was arranging freshly washed plates, I heard Kelvin talking loudly on the phone in the living room. He said, "I'm doing everything myself. I'm in charge here. This whole place will soon be mine anyway." He laughed proudly after saying those words. I didn't drop the plates. I didn't shout. I didn't even frown. I simply placed the plates on the counter and wiped my hands. What he didn't know was simple. Nothing in that house would ever belong to him. Not now. Not later. Not ever. So when he told everyone that he would set the Christmas table and handle the entire celebration, I agreed without hesitation. I wanted him to feel as comfortable as possible. People show their true selves when they believe no one can stop them. Tanya continued helping him decorate, still believing peace was the best choice. Leo kept running around the tree with excitement, not knowing the tension around him, and I stood quietly in the background, preparing food and watching everything unfold. By the time Christmas Day arrived, Kelvin felt powerful. He believed the whole event revolved around him. He believed he controlled the house, the guests, and even me. What he didn't know was that I had prepared for that day long before he even planned the party. Christmas afternoon arrived with noise, music, and the kind of excitement that usually fills a happy home. Guests were laughing in the living room, children were running around with candy canes, and the lights on the tree blinked softly. Everything looked peaceful on the outside. No one could guess what was happening underneath. Kelvin moved around like he was the host of a big event. He walked from the kitchen to the dining area, checking every plate, every spoon, and every decoration. He kept telling people how much work he had done. He even told one of his friends, "If I didn't take over this place, it would still look like an old house." They both laughed. I heard them clearly, but I stayed quiet. Tanya kept smoothing the tablecloth and adjusting the chairs. She forced small smiles, but her eyes looked tired. She wanted the evening to go well, but I could tell she was walking on eggshells around her own husband. Leo sat near the corner, swinging his legs and watching everything with wide, innocent eyes. When it was time for everyone to sit, I walked toward the table. I didn't rush. I simply wanted to take my usual seat, the one I had sat in for years. The room was warm from the oven, and the smell of roasted chicken made the air feel cozy. Nothing about the moment felt dangerous or heavy until Kelvin turned around. He froze when he saw me walking toward the table. His smile faded. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened, as if my simple movement had offended him. "Where are you going?" he asked loudly. I blinked, surprised by the tone. "I'm taking my seat." He stepped forward, blocking the chair. His body grew tense, his arms stiff at his sides. "No, not today. You're not part of this dinner." The room went quiet, just like that. The laughter died. The music in the living room suddenly felt too loud. Guests stopped mid-conversation. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. Another person dropped a fork. Tania's hands froze on the back of a chair. Her face turned pale. She looked down quickly, as if hiding behind silence would make the moment disappear. Kelvin raised his voice even more. "I said you're not invited. This is my table. Go away." He didn't whisper it. He didn't try to hide it. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted to show control. He wanted to make me feel small. But I didn't feel small. I felt steady. I stood there calmly, looking at the man who had forgotten where he was standing. He had forgotten the walls around him were mine. He had forgotten the roof above him belonged to me. He had forgotten that the ground his feet touched was not his to claim. I saw Leo watching me with sad eyes. He didn't understand why his father was shouting, but he understood something was wrong. He held onto his cup so tightly that his little fingers turned white. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, unsure of what to say. Some of them admired Kelvin and didn't want to offend him. Others were shocked by the way he spoke to me. But none of them moved. I didn't answer him. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. My silence was stronger than any words I could have spoken. I simply turned away from the table, smoothing my dress with slow, steady hands. Then I walked toward the front door, step by step, without rushing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaken. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what I would do next. I had known for months what I would do if Kelvin ever crossed the final line. He believed he controlled the house. He believed he controlled the evening. He believed nothing could stop him. But he had pushed too far, and I was finally ready to take back what was mine. I reached the front door with steady steps, feeling every eye in the house following me. The warm smell of Christmas food faded behind me, replaced by the cool air coming from the hallway. I did not rush. I did not look back. I simply opened the small drawer near the entrance, my private drawer where I kept a set of special documents. They were the same papers my lawyer friend helped me prepare months earlier. I held them gently, not to show off, but because I knew the moment had finally come to use them. When I turned around, the room was silent, truly silent. Guests stood frozen, their plates untouched. Tanya stood beside a chair, unsure whether to breathe or speak. Leo stayed on his seat, hugging his cup, watching me the way a child watches a storm forming in the sky. Kelvin stood near the center of the table, arms crossed, chest lifted, still trying to look in control. I walked back toward the dining room slowly, holding the papers by my side. When I reached the edge of the table, I placed them gently on the wooden surface. The sound of the papers touching the table was soft, but in the quiet room, it felt as loud as a strike of thunder. Kelvin frowned. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked, still trying to sound powerful. I looked at him calmly. "These," I said, "are the ownership documents of this house." A few guests exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Ownership?" I continued, "I updated everything this year. Every wall, every room, every corner legally belongs to me alone. No one else has any control over this home. Not now. Not later." Kelvin's smile disappeared. His confidence cracked. He stepped closer and snatched one of the papers, scanning it with shaking hands. His eyes darted across the page, and his face slowly changed from proud to confused, then from confused to pale. He knew what he was reading. He knew what it meant. He knew he had no power here. I spoke again, not in anger, but in a voice that carried the truth of every moment he had disrespected me. "You shouted at me in my own house. You told me to go away from my own table. You forgot where you stand." Tanya covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Not because she was angry with me, but because she finally understood how much pain I had been holding inside quietly. I continued, "I never wanted to embarrass you, Kelvin. I tried to give you space. I tried to give you respect. But respect is something you return. You chose to act like this house was yours. So today, I am correcting that mistake." I pointed toward the front door, not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. "Leave my home. Not tomorrow. Not later. Today." Gasps filled the room. Kelvin's face turned red, then pale again. He looked around for support, but the guests avoided his eyes. They had all seen how he treated me. They had all heard the way he shouted. Nobody wanted to defend him now. Tanya walked toward me slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. She touched my hand gently, not to stop me, but to show she was finally standing with me. Leo ran to my side and held my leg tightly, as if protecting me in his small way. Kelvin stood frozen for a long moment, then finally put the paper down. Without another word, he picked up his jacket, lowered his head, and walked out of the house. The door closed behind him. The room remained silent, but this time, it was a peaceful silence. A silence that felt like fresh air after months of holding in a heavy breath. I sat down at the table, in my usual seat. Tanya sat beside me. Leo climbed onto his chair, smiling with relief. The guests slowly relaxed, unsure what to say, but grateful the tension was gone. I looked at the food, the lights, the decorations Kelvin had bragged about. Then I looked at the faces around the table, faces that finally felt safe again. And for the first time that day, I smiled. Christmas dinner continued in a quiet, gentle way. No shouting, no pride, no fear, just peace. My home was my home again, and everyone knew it. In the end, justice wasn't loud, it was quiet, sharp, and final. As the truth came to light, every lie collapsed under its own weight. I walked away stronger, wiser, and finally free. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.